Conservative judges. President Trump is set to announce 10 nominees to the federal court. French elections. France has a new president with little political experience. We'll have a report from Paris. Released from captivity, dozens of Chibok schoolgirls are free after a deal with the terror group Boko Haram in Nigeria. The new recruits. The next class of Swiss Guards takes a pledge to protect the Pope at any cost. On EWTN News Nightly for Monday, May 8th, 2017. Good evening from Washington, D.C., and thank you to those of you joining us from around the world for news from a Catholic perspective. I'm Lauren Ashburn. President Donald Trump takes another step to fulfill a campaign promise. He's expected to announce 10 conservative judges to fill court openings at the federal level. Correspondent Wyatt Goolsbee reports from the White House. Good evening, Wyatt.
Good evening, Lauren. There are more than 120 vacancies on the federal judiciary, and it's a top priority for President Trump to fill those benches. On the campaign trail, he promised to make sure they go to conservatives, and today he could make good on that promise.
The Trump administration names nearly a dozen federal judges as nominees for key posts.
These 10 individuals that the president has chosen were chosen for their deep knowledge of the law and their commitment to upholding constitutional principles.
White House Press Secretary Sean Spicer says two of the candidates come from President Trump's list of possible picks for Supreme Court justice. They are Justices Joan Larson and David Strauss. According to National Review, the premier conservative publication, Larson currently sits on the Michigan Supreme Court and clerked for the late Justice Antonin Scalia. Strauss is reported to be the first Jewish justice to serve on the Minnesota Supreme Court and clerked for Justice Clarence Thomas. Other names praised by National Review: Amy Coney Barrett, a law professor at the University of Notre Dame and former clerk for Justice Scalia; John K. Bush, one of former President Reagan's attorneys during the Iran-Contra investigations; and Kevin Newsom, a former clerk for retired Justice David Souter. The White House credits the Heritage Foundation, a conservative think tank, with guiding the president.
It will take quite some time before President Trump fills enough of these vacancies that will have a really discernible difference. But you got to start somewhere, and the president's made a healthy start.
The president also got help from the Federalist Society, run by Leonard Leo, a prominent pro-life Catholic. The announcement comes less than a month after Trump's final pick for the Supreme Court, Neil Gorsuch, was confirmed as justice to the nation's highest court.
Critics of President Trump say he's stacking the judiciary with ultra-conservatives who are opposed to women's rights, the environment, and consumer and worker protections. They won't likely be pleased by some of the names coming out today. Lauren?
Wyatt, so much focus is always on the Supreme Court nominations, but why don't you give us an idea of the importance of these federal justices?
Well, Lauren, the Heritage Foundation says that the Supreme Court hears about 75 to 80 cases per year. Last year, the Federal Court of Appeals decided 55,000 cases. So, yes, these judges are on the bench for life, and they have a big impact on society as well. Lauren?
Wyatt Goolsbee reporting from the White House. Thank you, Wyatt. President Obama reportedly warned Donald Trump not to hire Michael Flynn. Former acting Attorney General Sally Yates also says she warned the White House that Flynn's contacts with Russia put him in a compromised position.
The Russians also knew that General Flynn had misled the vice president and others, and that created a compromise situation, a situation where the national security advisor essentially could be blackmailed by the Russians.
Yates testified today before a Senate panel investigating Russian interference in the presidential election. President Trump distanced himself from Flynn's troubles. He tweeted today that it was the Obama administration that gave Flynn the highest security clearance. Following months of threats directed against Jewish institutions in the past few months, FBI Director James Comey says we must stand up to stop prejudice. He spoke today at the Anti-Defamation League's Leadership Summit in Washington.
Hate crime hurts more than just the victim. It harms the entire community. Because an attack on one of us, because of who we are, or what we believe, or what we look like, is an attack on all of us.
The Anti-Defamation League was founded in 1913 to stop the vilification of Jewish people. Now, Comey also has talked about today that it feels like he is in a dive bar when he's talking about Twitter, where you can hear everybody screaming at the TV. He says he only watches Twitter. He doesn't really tweet. Federal appeals court in Virginia is considering the legality of President Trump's revised travel order. It bars people from 6 Muslim-majority nations from entering the U.S. for 90 days. It is unclear when that court will issue a ruling. French voters celebrate the country's new president. Emmanuel Macron handily defeated Marine Le Pen in yesterday's presidential runoff. Now he must pull together a majority of lawmakers in the mid-June legislative election. Joining us now is Elena Casas, correspondent with Feature Story News from Paris, France. Elena, there was a large Catholic turnout. According to one poll, about 62% of Catholics voted for Macron. In past election, French Catholics have typically voted for more mainstream conservative candidates. Why did they vote so overwhelmingly for Macron?
Well, overwhelmingly in the first round 2 weeks ago, they did vote for the mainstream Conservative, but he didn't get through to this second round. He came third, leaving many of his supporters somewhat without a political home. Of course, in the end, about 62% of them did vote for Emmanuel Macron. But what's more surprising here is that 38% of people calling themselves practicing Catholics nevertheless voted for the extreme right, which was for a long time considered taboo in France. The Front National has been trying to reach out to Catholics. They've tried promoting policies like cutting public funding to family planning, and obviously for some voters that tactic has worked.
The French Bishops' Conference didn't endorse either candidate, but they did issue a statement giving Catholics elements for discernment and saying it's important to welcome migrants and support European unity. Did that have an impact on the outcome?
Well, many Catholic voters said they were disappointed that the Conference of Bishops didn't issue a statement discouraging people, or rather encouraging people, to vote for Emmanuel Macron, like they did 15 years ago when Marine Le Pen's father, Jean-Marie, got into the second round of the election, and like the Protestant churches, France's chief rabbi, and the Council of Muslims did. Really, this reveals a political split that developed in the French Conference of Bishops in 2013 when the outgoing government passed an equal marriage law, which some bishops felt was a total betrayal, and they then felt they could not call on the faithful to vote for a candidate, Emmanuel Macron, who was a minister in that government. But some bishops, nevertheless, on an individual basis, did issue statements saying that Catholics should vote against Marine Le Pen, and indeed 2/3 of them have done so.
This is going to be a very centrist government. What does that mean for issues like abortion and religious liberty?
Well, it means that nothing will change, essentially, on those issues. None of the candidates in this election did suggest changing the abortion law. And of course, France is a deeply secular country, a constitutionally secular country in which expressions of religion in public life are unconstitutional. That's not something that Emmanuel Macron is likely to change, or indeed something that Marine Le Pen would have contemplated changing.
Elena Casas, correspondent with Feature Story News from Paris, France. Thank you for joining us.
Thank you.
The French election causes reverberations across Europe. Other countries were keeping a very close eye on the results to see how it would affect them. Vatican correspondent Mary Shovlin joins us from Rome. Mary, we just heard from Paris. How are Italians reacting to the results of the French election?
Lauren, beginning with the Prime Minister, there's a great sense of relief. He tweeted, "Hooray for Macron," that, like the future of Europe is safe. And there was a real sense, at least among the Italian politicians, that the very future of the European Union was riding on the back of this French election. We had Le Pen, who wanted to leave the European Union and have closed borders, and Macron was the other end of that spectrum. And so all of Europe was watching, from Germany to Italy, all throughout the continent, because if France had voted for Le Pen and later voted to come out of the European Union as we know it would be over.
So, Mary, in the United States, Catholics mobilized for the 2016 presidential elections and have been organizing for years. Do Catholics in Italy have an impact on elections?
That's a great question, Lauren, and because we often think, Italy is being so Catholic, and it is. Catholics are Catholics here largely by default, and that's a good thing. But that when it comes to election time, it doesn't mean that they mobilize as a bloc, because they are a majority. And so as the majority of this nation is Catholic, it reflects, unfortunately, modern society. Catholics span the spectrum here, from very conservative to very progressive. So we don't have the Catholics voting as a bloc, and the more modern Italy becomes, I would have to say, Lauren, the less impact the Vatican has on Italian politics, even though it's here surrounded by Italy, within the very heart of Italy. So we see that changing a little bit as well.
Mary Shevlin, EWTN News Nightly Vatican correspondent. Thanks for joining us, Mary.
Thank you, Lauren.
Anxious parents in Nigeria wait to learn if they will be reunited with their daughters. Nigerian newspapers published the names of 82 Chibok schoolgirls who were set free 3 years after being kidnapped by Islamic extremists. A government official says the girls were released Saturday in exchange for 5 Boko Haram commanders. Human rights lawyer Emmanuel Agobe calls it a good trade, but he says their healing will take time.
It will take quite a bit of adjusting and trauma healing for them to normalize. We need to have an reintegration plan that involves the families.
113 schoolgirls remain missing. Human rights advocates fear some of the girls have been used by Boko Haram to carry out suicide bombings. The United Nations says Boko Haram has killed more than 4,000 Nigerian children since 2014 and recruited 1,650 children to fight for the terror group. Many of the children are abused and forced to convert to Islam. U.S. and Afghan forces say the leader of ISIS in Afghanistan is dead. The Pentagon says Sheikh Abdul Hasib was killed April 27th during a raid. Several other high-ranking ISIS leaders were also killed. North Korea detains another American citizen accused of committing hostile acts against the territory. Kim Hak-sung was arrested Saturday at the same place. Another American was taken into custody last week. The U.S. has accused North Korea of using hostages as pawns in international negotiations. Pope Francis is urging bishops in Venezuela to build bridges between the government and the opposition to put an end to violence in that country. In a letter, the Holy Father says, "I encourage you not to let the children of Venezuela fall into mistrust and despair, because these are bad things that penetrate the hearts of people when they see no prospect of the future." In his role as Bishop of Rome, Pope Francis ordained 10 new priests on Good Shepherd Sunday.
Pater et Filius et Spiritus Sancti. Amen.
The group joined the Pope during Regina Coeli at the Vatican yesterday, Francis telling the men to imitate Jesus in every aspect of their ministry to avoid hypocrisy. The Holy Father adding a tip: always be joyful. The Holy Father reflects on his own upcoming trip to Fatima during a meeting with Rome's Pontifical Portuguese College. He told students and staff the apparitions of Our Lady were a moment of grace, and it allowed the 3 shepherd children to know and love Jesus. Pope Francis will travel to Fatima on Friday to mark the 100th anniversary of the Marian apparitions. Coming up, a pro-life Democrat meets resistance from leaders in his own party. And Pope Francis calls on us to be open to the Holy Spirit. Pope Francis encourages us to be open to God's surprises.
Ti hanno parlato e hanno visto che quello era la strada dello Spirito Santo.
During Mass this morning, the Holy Father said being open to the Holy Spirit keeps our hearts from becoming hard and will help us discern what God wants from us and from the world. A sanctuary cities bill is now law in Texas. The state's governor, Greg Abbott, signed the bill last night on Facebook Live. It bans sanctuary cities and penalizes those not complying with immigration laws. The measure goes into effect in September. Critics say the new law encourages racial profiling and threatens the jobs of lawmakers and police officers who do not comply. Democrats, desperate for fresh faces, cast 37-year-old Heath Mello as a next-generation leader, but he's pro-life and Catholic, and that's upsetting the National Party. Mello is running for mayor of Omaha, Nebraska. The election is tomorrow. He says he has a bipartisan record and will tackle some big issues. But the head of the Democratic National Committee, Tom Perez, spoke out saying every Democrat, like every American, should support a woman's right to make her own choices. And he called on Democrats to speak with one voice Democrats remain divided. Joining us now is Tim Carney, commentary editor of the Washington Examiner. Tim, welcome back to the program.
Thank you.
So let's take a look at what DNC Chair Tom Perez, he clarified his stand in a tweet because the far left pilloried him for not 100% backing abortion. He said, "I am committed, as I have been my entire life, to ensuring access to the full range of reproductive health services, including abortion." House Minority Leader Nancy Pelosi told the Post abortion rights should not be a litmus test. Which is it?
So they are all over the place. I think originally the way that we look at it was that Tom Perez wanted to have a big tent, and then embracing Mello, who isn't even sort of across the board pro-life as much as he sponsored a compromise bill saying that abortionists had to inform a woman that ultrasounds sort of exists, that they are a thing. That was the extent of that bill. That was too far for sort of the abortion lobby in the Democratic Party, and they really pushed back, and I think that Perez really got rattled by that because it's a very powerful lobby in the party. On the other hand, Democrats know the political reality of it is that they're not going to get back to a majority in the U.S. House.
There are only a handful of pro-life Democrats. Bob Casey in Pennsylvania. Who else? Joe Manchin, West Virginia. Is there really room for pro-lifers in the party?
The party would have to change from what it's been for the last decade to make room for pro-lifers. If you remember Barack Obama, he campaigned hardcore on. He raised money on defending partial birth abortion. But when Democrats took back control of the House in 2006, they had a bigger tent. They had Rahm Emanuel and Howard Dean went out there and tried to recruit in conservative places conservative-ish Dems. So the party has had lots of different incarnations recently. In the Obama era, it had no room for pro-lifers.
But if they want
to take that, there are pro-lifers who might not agree with Trump. There is a possibility for outreach, but that donor base is so tied up with the pro-choice cause, with the abortion lobby, that it would really be alienating a core part of their base to reach out to pro-lifers.
All right. Well, you mentioned President Obama. I just have to ask you while you're here. He has been chiming in quite a bit lately about his opinion on health care reform, other issues. We saw him at his Chicago library. Is he meddling? Is this typical for a president? I don't think it is.
Well, it's hard to say what's typical, right?
Okay.
Because these days we have social media. It's just easier to get out there. And also, if you look at the past two presidents, George W. Bush left as one of the most unpopular presidents after the Iraq War and sort of the lobbying and ethics scandals.
Disappeared to painting.
Yes, and Bill Clinton left amid scandal. I mean, the whole second half of his administration was scandal. He issued a pardon to the husband of a donor, and Democrats finally could admit that they were sick of his, philandering and all that. So this is the first time that we have had a two-term president leave as a popular president since Ronald Reagan. So to say it's not typical,
okay,
the background, the fundamental facts aren't typical.
But I think a lot of people are annoyed.
Yes.
I think we could agree on that, right? All right, Tim Carney, thank you so much. Commentary editor of the Washington Examiner.
Thank you.
Up next, remembering Bishop Fulton Sheen, the modern-day push to make him a saint. Guarding the Vatican. See the new recruits who will protect the Pope. If God is love and you are called to be like God, then you too must love. Those are words to live by from EWTN's foundress, Mother Angelica. It's also on her calendar for today. More than 1,000 priests are celebrating Mass today in remembrance of Archbishop Fulton Sheen. He was born on this day 122 years ago. The priests hope the added attention will move his sainthood cause forward. Sheen died in 1979. The TV evangelist is well known and still seen, if you're paying attention, right here on EWTN. A new Netflix series debuts this week, dramatizing Anne of Green Gables, the beloved children's book chronicling the adventures of an 11-year-old orphan girl.
I make up stories all the time.
I could never do that.
I don't think imagination's my strong suit.
Really? I don't know what I'd do without mine.
But some critics are concerned the popular streaming video services version is inappropriate. Melissa Hansen is the program director with the Parents Television Council, an advocacy group promoting family-friendly entertainment. Welcome to the program.
Thank you for having me on.
That clip we just saw was quintessential, perfect Anne of Green Gables. This girl who is inspiring, who loves to imagine things. Yet, and I'm listening to this audiobook with my daughter, yet this version is inappropriate? What's going on?
Yeah, well, there has been some video footage that's been leaked online, made available online, that has Anne engaging in some sort of suggestive adult-themed dialogue with her best friend, Diana Barry. My understanding is that it's really only in one episode. It's not throughout the whole series. It's an isolated incident, but it's enough to tarnish the experience, I think, for many, many fans of the show who grew up reading the book, who love the book, who love the series, and are looking forward to sharing it with their own children. Just that little bit that they felt necessary to include.
You say it's Breaking Bad. Let's look at it.
Breaking
I'm sorry,
yeah.
not Breaking Bad, Breaking Anne,
yeah,
because of the person who is writing it. Tell us about that.
Yeah, Moira Wally Beckett, who is the showrunner for the TV series Breaking Bad, which is about the high school chemistry teacher turned meth dealer. She is the writer-producer of this series. And when the production was announced last summer, they promised that this was going to be an edgier Anne. So it's not like the Megan Fellows version from a couple decades ago that people may remember.
You wrote in the article, Anne of Green Gables has lasted for over 100 years because the truths and life lessons that are revealed to the reader transcend the circumstances of the times in which it was written.
Right.
So what you're saying is, what's wrong? You're saying, you know, to the people who are updating this book, hey, don't update it. Is that really what you're saying? What's wrong with updating a book?
Well, it has endured for 100 years because the lessons are timeless. And in trying to make it relevant for today's audiences, they're really destroying what is the essence of Anne, of the character and of the book.
Innocent. She was very innocent.
Exactly right. Exactly.
And if you have her doing things...
engaging in sort of suggestive dialogue and things like that, that's totally contrary to the character that Lucy Maud Montgomery created.
What age do you think should watch this?
Well, I would suggest probably 13 and older.
Because of
with
those
a parent.
scenes.
Yeah,
And I would love to watch this with my 9-year-old. As I said, I'm listening to it on audiobook with her because I so much want us to share that experience. So, all right, this is bad.
Yeah.
Let's talk about what's good. I just watched on Netflix the other night with my girls, The Little Prince. Perfect for a 9 and 13-year-old. What else? Where else can we go to get inspirational, good content we can all watch together?
Yeah, well, there are a few cable outlets in addition to EWTN, which has some great family-friendly
Of course, we have wonderful family-friendly programming.
There's also INSP and UP. And,
INSP is what?
It's the Inspiration Network, but they have a lot of family-oriented programming. So there are a few bright spots out there. Hallmark Channel's another one, but you do have to look for them. And UP, yeah.
Okay, all right. Well, we appreciate your insights. Thank you so much for coming in and joining us. Melissa Henson, Program Director with the Parents Television Council.
Thank you.
The world's oldest standing army now has 40 new members sworn in this weekend. A ritual ceremony with the Swiss Guards took place outside the Apostolic Palace at the Vatican. Before the ceremony, Pope Francis told the Guards they are called to serve the power of faith. The recruits must enroll for at least 2 years, be single, must be a Swiss Catholic male younger than 30. And their main duty, of course, is to protect the Pope. That does it for all of us here at EWTN News Nightly. To all of you around the world, I'm Lauren Ashburn. Thank you for watching. We leave you with more of this weekend's Swiss Guard celebration. Good night, and God bless.